But all right, yeah, we like to just kind of jump right into it. I'm kind of a newer developer myself, so I've looked at your career from the outside looking in. I've always looked at you as sort of a contrarian with some of the decisions that you make. You tend to be the first luxury in a market. So I was always curious, did you see the need for luxury and then fill that need? Or did you just decide to create it and do sort of the Field of Dreams model and, you figured if you build it, they will come?
So the answer is I am a baby boomer. And my entire career has been based on building buildings for me and people my age. And when I started out in the 1970s, believe it or not, I was a home builder. And then I gravitated into rehabilitating historic buildings into luxury apartments in 1981. And that was when baby boomers were in their low 30s, and many of them were postgraduates. They were in the suburbs. They were moving back to the city. They were taking jobs in various categories. And we had this wonderful inventory of historic buildings in Philadelphia because it had been underdeveloped. And we had all these great assets that were just sitting there. That's the business I went into. And I was successful. Our company grew to be the largest rehabber of historic buildings in the United States. But to go to your question, I continued along those lines. And we're sitting at Arthaus right now, which is the latest chapter in Carl Dranoff's history. It's, I think, my 77th or 78th project.
Wow.
And it's the biggest, the most expensive, the tallest. And who am I building this building for? Baby boomers. Basically, folks who are still working and thinking about their next stage of life, or maybe they have jobs that take them various places and they need a home in Philadelphia that they can use as home base, but they travel a lot. Or they may have several domiciles like Florida, for example, and Philadelphia. And then we've got Gen Y, who's a little younger than me, who are also buyers of luxury housing and renters of luxury housing in Philadelphia. So it's been relatively easy for me to think about my next project because I'm always thinking about my age group and the age group that's maybe a little bit younger, people who are basically 50 to 75 years old. Now, of course, I also own an apartment portfolio, but my apartments were designed for a younger group. So I'm not exclusively baby boomers.
Got it. So the for sale stuff, you were building for you and your friends.
Yes. Good way to say it.
Yeah.
So talking about that luxury model that you kind of came into, you've always been someone that I feel like pushes the boundaries when it comes to, luxury development. As you mentioned, we're here in the Arthaus right now. How did you decide over your career where to kind of push those boundaries, meaning location? And, was it something where you felt like you were kind of building a neighborhood around it? Or how did you really come up with the idea for the Arthaus?
Well, I have to lead up to Arthaus. That's the culmination.
This episode was sponsored by Move PHL. Learn more about Move through this 30-second clip and visit them on Instagram at MovePHL, MUVEPHL.
When you love the city where you live, really love it, you want to be a part of its future.
We founded Move PHL, a boutique Philadelphia real estate group focused on acquisitions, development, and sales. Our passion is simple. We're focused on building Philadelphia project by project.
Philadelphia is a city of change. It's a place where old and new collide, where history is reimagined. Our mission is right in our name, to help find what moves you.
I have had a career of reviving neighborhoods. And the way I went about it was, as was used that word previously, I believe, contrarian. And I've been a contrarian mainly because when I started out, I didn't have an institutional backer. I didn't have a lot of money. My father was a dry cleaner. The most he ever made in a year was, I think, $9,000.
Wow.
My mom was a housekeeper. I grew up in Northeast Philadelphia in a row home, very modest. I went to public school. And when I graduated, I went to a school where I could work my way through. I went to Drexel in the co-op program and got a civil engineering degree. And so that goes to where I selected. When you're a contrarian, you are thinking about areas that need a lot of work, that are not popular, that are not mainstream, that you could buy land or buildings cheaply before they're discovered and the prices skyrocket. So those were the kinds of neighborhoods I was looking for, undiscovered areas that I felt would be would lend themselves to not only a single project but multiple developments. So where did I look? I started out, as I mentioned previously, in Old City, and I went into Franklintown and Callow Hill and parts of Center City, Philadelphia. And when I started Dranoff Properties, which was in 1997, this is post-historic landmarks for living, I tended to gravitate towards neighborhoods that had large historic buildings that were just sitting there vacant or underdeveloped. So one area that I found was Fittler Square. Now, it's hard to believe that Fittler Square, as it is today, was once a very dog-eared, tired neighborhood of older row homes, underinvested, the wonderful Schuylkill River Park that we take for granted, that we love to jog on every morning, and it's just a wonderful place to lift your spirits every day, be right next to the river. That park, when I started, which was in 1986, was called Needle Park.
Wow.
And I don't have to describe why it would be called Needle Park.
Yeah, we can use our imagination.
So I developed a historic building there in 1986. It was a warehouse that belonged to the University of Pennsylvania. And I was able to buy it from them and convert it into a property that's now called Locust Point, that was originally apartments and has since been converted into condominiums. My second property was a next-door neighbor. It was a antiquated manufacturing facility called National Publishing, a 7-story warehouse that manufactured Bibles. In fact, they were the largest Bible manufacturer in the country. When you open that drawer, when you stay in a hotel and you have the dresser right next to you, and you open the drawer and there's a Bible in it, open the first page, it'll say National Publishing.
Wow. I'll have to do that next time.
So they were still manufacturing Bibles, and it was on multiple stories, so it was a very obsolete, inefficient operation. And working with PIDC, we were able to find them a 1-story plant in Northeast Philadelphia, and I was able to move them to a new plant and take over their building, and I paid them a pretty hefty price for it at the time, which was $1998, and proceeded to convert that building into 152 loft-style apartments. It was an immediate home run.
That's on. Is that Locust on the Park?
That's Locust on the Park.
Yeah, I looked at that building for my last when I was deciding where to live.
It's still highly popular.
It's great. The views are amazing.
The views are amazing. You walk outside, you practically fall into the Schuylkill River path. And of course, if you're a Penn student or Drexel, you can walk right across the bridge. You can walk to Rittenhouse Square. You can walk to Broad Street. You could walk to the Delaware River. It's not that long of a walk. So it's got great access. You can get in and out of the city very easily. And that's what made Fittler Square such a great neighborhood for me. It had all those great attributes. It had the the transportation nexus, because you could walk any place and drive any place. And yet here was a warehouse building that was just sitting there as a manufacturing plant on its last legs as a Bible manufacturer. And I was able to get that building and convert it into apartments. It's since been sold to a company that bought a portfolio from me of 5 buildings. And that included the next building that I finished after Locust on the Park, which was the Left Bank. Are you familiar with the Left Bank Apartments?
Don't know
It's
that one.
right across the Schuylkill River on Penn's campus.
Okay.
Now, here's a warehouse building that was 800,000 square feet. Now, to put that into understandable terms, if you turn that horizontal building 90 degrees and it stood upright, it would be about a 44-story building.
Wow.
Wow, it's a lot of land
So-
in Philadelphia.
Right.
Yeah.
Right
And
there.
that warehouse was just sitting there. Penn owned it, and Penn put out an RFP to attract developers to redevelop the property,
Sorry, what's an RFP?
a request for proposal.
Okay.
So they had the idea that there were no market rate apartments. It wasn't called University City at the time. It was West Philly.
Right.
And this was in the 90s. And
What a rebranding that was.
I got the name of the building from an earlier naming exercise on Locust on the Park. We went through 20 or 25 names, and one of the rejects was the Left Bank. So when I found this warehouse on the other side of the river on Penn's campus, literally the gateway to their campus at 32nd and Walnut, we pulled out our names from the past, and we rebadged that building the Left Bank. Now, actually, it's on the right bank because the water flows. You go with the flow of the river, and the flow determines whether it's the right bank or the left bank.
Right.
So
Flows.
the left bank, which we were going to call Locust Park, was on the left bank, and the left bank, as it's
Decided
called
to
now, is
reuse
really
that
on the
name.
right bank.
Wonder
But
how
it
many
was-
people know that story.
But it was great branding, and we brought a loft-style apartment. I won the RFP.
Was there a lot of people competing with you?
Yes, we had a lot of competition.
So what
And,
set you apart in that particular one?
That's an easy one to answer. To get that answer, I had to ask John Fry why I was selected. John Fry, as you may know, has been the president of Drexel for probably a dozen years. But before that, he was the president of Franklin and Marshall. And before that, he was executive vice president of the University of Pennsylvania. He became to Philadelphia because he was invited by Judy Roden, who was the president of Penn at the time. And Judy Roden recruited John to come to Philadelphia and take that position. And one of the first things he did was try to figure out how to form public-private partnerships where a university like Penn could use the balance sheet of somebody else, and Penn wouldn't have to spend their own money on building market-rate housing, and they wouldn't have to guarantee loans, and they wouldn't have to take risk. So they came up with the ground lease idea, and that's the way we did it. I ground leased the building from them, and I took all the development risk, put all of my own money into it, and it was highly successful.
So they actually still own the land.
They still own the land, subject to a ground lease. Now, why was I selected? I was selected because I had the best idea for the building, and I had the deep rehab experience to carry it off and make it successful. Remember, I ran the largest rehab company in the United States in the 1980s, and here it was 1999, and I had all this experience. And I hired architects to design the rehab for me. And when I went to the interview, it was just me and the architect. And the other groups, they brought dozens of people. They brought their civil engineers and their marketing folks and social engineers and a whole array of people because they knew they were going to get a lot of questions. And I got it. I had this most concise presentation with the fewest people, and yet I won it. Why was that? So I asked John Fry about a year or two later, why did I win that competition? He said, "Oh, Carl, that was easy. You had such a firm handle on what you were doing. You knew exactly. You lived that design. You lived that building. You knew exactly what you wanted to do. That's the kind of person we wanted. We wanted someone who had the confidence and the ability to carry it off without fail, because we couldn't fail on our first public-private partnership.
So it's safe to say you came prepared, and they more so bought into you.
They bought into me, exactly. And I think that was a life lesson for me, and maybe a teaching moment for the people listening to this podcast, because when you start out on your own, as I did, I found that I needed to work harder and be more knowledgeable and to really do my homework and have a specialized knowledge that other people didn't have. Now, because I was trained as a civil engineer, I always had a fairly deep understanding of how to build things. And when I was rehabbing buildings in the 80s, and we were doing 8 to 10 rehabs a year, I acquired a tremendous and deep knowledge base about rehabbing buildings and how you do it, and what the costs are, and what the design tricks are, and how you utilize high ceilings and big windows, which also can be a detriment if you don't do it correctly, and you end up having a column in the middle of a room. So you have to design around some of these obstacles. But once you have it down and you have that specialized knowledge, you become better than everybody else. So while I didn't have a deep balance sheet, I did have tremendous market knowledge and construction knowledge, and that was what set me apart.
In talking a little bit about, market knowledge, just specifically that you mentioned, talking to some of maybe the younger people on the pod and just anyone in general, can you talk a little bit about, what you guys are doing right now in this cycle, and how you're kind of, you've been through multiple cycles right now. How is this cycle a little bit similar? How is it different? And, what would your advice be to different businesses going through, this stage right now?
I'll try to answer that, but first a little bit of history. Real estate is very cyclical. You know that. So I started on my own in 1974. Did I know there was going to be an Arab oil embargo in 1974? No. You couldn't get gas. You couldn't drive to work. You had to get gasoline if your license plate was odd on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and if it was even on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Saturday. And this was a huge impediment, and this was the first cycle I went through. Then I went through another cycle in 79 to 80 where we had intense inflation and interest rate spikes, just like we're having now, only bigger.
That's the one that everyone compares right now to the most.
And I lived right through it. I was building homes at the time. It was before I went into the rehab business.
Do you see a lot of the same similarities that everyone on the news talks about?
Yes. I'll get to that in a second. Then there was another downturn in 89 to 92. We had the dot-com bust of 1999 to 2001. Then we had the Great Recession of 2008 to 2011 or so. And we have now spiking interest rates, which is causing the next downturn. We're in it right now. So if you take the average time of between recessions, it's 9.6 years. So virtually every 10 years, we're going to have a downturn in the real estate business. So you learn how to steer around downturns. And the biggest thing that you can do, and what you ask about today, and I think it's incumbent upon everyone who started projects over the last couple of years and is looking at new projects, they've got to have cash reserves. You can't take your profits and buy a new home, buy a new car, and not worry about the future and not put money aside to get you through tough times, because that really was what separates the folks who survived. There are very few people that I know. There are few, but not many, people who started out with me or around the same time who still are building, who have survived all these downturns. So you've got to be ready for that. Also, the timing of when you start a project. Remember, if you're starting a real estate career, the most important thing that I tell people is Real estate is a marathon. It's not a sprint. Don't try to get rich quick. Build your assets over time, slowly. Start with a small project, then go to a bigger project and a bigger one, and expand from there. Get your expertise, get your cash, start your bank account, make sure you build a balance sheet, build your organization, and over time, you will build it up and you will survive and you'll be smarter. And in a time like today, you may look at a great project and it takes tremendous willpower to say no. Great project, wrong time. I don't want to take on a brand new large project where I could end up, in a bad situation 2 or 3 years from now, where the market hasn't recovered, where interest rates are still high, and I am struggling and I need help. So it takes a lot of patience and willpower.
Yeah. No, I mean, kind of to change gears a little bit here, you talked about different things that can kind of offset, higher interest rates, specifically looking at like development. We have a partial 10-year tax abatement in the city of Philadelphia. Can you talk a little bit about how that's been able to allow developers to continue to build in these high cost, high interest rate markets? And then the second part of that question, can you talk about how that has created wealth, not only for the buildings that you've made for the city, but just other developers in general?
Sure. Well, the 10-year tax abatement came about as a result of me, Paul Levy, and Ron Rubin, who in the mid-1990s looked out Ron's window at the Bellevue and saw a dozen vacant buildings on North Broad Street. And we knew that there was a way to develop those buildings with economic incentives. And we came up with the idea of the 10-year tax abatement, which had just been started in Lower Manhattan and was very successful. And we brought that program here. And it continued. In fact, it was expanded to new construction by John Street in 2001. It started under Ed Rendell, and then John Street expanded it. And it became a fixture. And then when we got to the period of 2015, 16, 17, we had, and as you know, during COVID, we had low interest rates. So low interest rates plus tax abatement made up for higher construction costs that we have in urban areas, all union construction, and high land prices. So we were in balance, and you could, the projects would pencil out. You could build townhomes, you could build low-rise, mid-rise, high-rise buildings, and pretty much pencil everything out. That landscape has completely changed because the 10-year tax abatement has now gone to essentially a 5-year tax abatement. So we lost quite a bit there. And of course, interest rates have spiked up, and construction costs have also, because of supply chain issues, have also spiked up. So now practically nothing pencils out. To answer your question, the 10-year tax abatement was essential because projects that would never have penciled out, would never have started, got built, got rehabbed. Condominiums came back to life because the buyers benefited from the 10-year tax abatement, not the developer. So buyers could then buy a condo and know that their taxes would be set for 10 years. It was a tremendous incentive. When we developed, Symphony House, which is just spitting distance from Arthaus. You can see it from here. The pink building, 32 stories. We sold it out. We sold out One Riverside, which we developed between 2015 and 2017, and the buyers enjoyed good resale values there and still do.
So are you anticipating development here in Philly to slow a little bit now that abatement was taken away? Or halved, rather?
Well, you're seeing that already. You're seeing there was a massive amount of permitting done at the end of 2001 to beat the 10-year tax abatement expiration deadline. A lot of those projects haven't started. And projects that are being permitted now and built now will be finished, but there's going to be a slowdown. It's already started.
And when you see for those that may not realize, in the luxury space, when you have, the 10-year tax abatement, it may incentivize other buyers from other areas. So therefore, you're growing a wealth base when you have something like that that's bringing in money to the city. Am I correct in kind of how I'm looking at that?
Yes, that's the
Drives
correct way.
people to the city.
Yes.
Josh, we sold many condos, including at Arthaus, to suburbanites who came into the city. They could have a fantastic walk to work, walk to everything lifestyle, a healthy lifestyle, a convenient lifestyle, and have tremendous amenities, and not have to pay that big real estate tax nut. In New Jersey, as you know, tax rates are very, very high, real estate taxes on homes, similarly in our other suburbs. So that gave Philadelphia a big edge in attracting, affluent people to come into the city. And those people who came into the city, they're now the city's biggest philanthropists. So who benefits? The charities, the nonprofits, all of the retailers and restaurants in the city.
Yeah, the businesses.
Yeah. So it was a huge, the 10-year tax abatement was probably the single best legislative triumph for urban revival in Philadelphia's history.
Yeah.
It's true.
I mean, so with that in mind, what's the case for Philly with the abatement leaving?
Well, a lot of people say that we don't need the abatement anymore. I would agree with that partially, because in the last 10 years, the Philadelphia has features that it didn't have when I was starting out as a developer. For example, we have a tremendous amount of job creation from the life sciences. We have a huge tourism industry that we didn't have hotels 20 years ago. So we have that. We have all the restaurants and nightlife in Philadelphia. We have the Avenue of the Arts. The Avenue of the Arts was probably one of the most singular contributions, ranking right up there with the 10-year tax abatement to help revive life in the city. And we're looking at the Kimmel Center to your right, that beautiful glass building where one of the greatest orchestras in the world plays. We have the ballet there. We have Broadway shows right up the street. We have speaker series. We have jazz. We have everything. And having live theater, there's no other concentration of theaters in North America like this except New York City. So that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Wow. We have an airport that's very close. We have two great waterfronts that are being fully developed. The Schuylkill is a little further along right now with the Schuylkill River Path and so forth, and buildings and a supermarket giant that just opened up at 23rd and Arch. And then we have the Delaware River, which is developing nicely, and that gives us a huge advantage as an urban destination for people coming in, not just from the suburbs, but from other states.
It's a good case for it. We know that you have a lot of things to do, so we're going to get to our last question here. It's a question that we ask everybody, and that is, if God came down and he just took away all of your financial resources and all of your connections, what would you do to restart from zero today in Philadelphia?
I would do exactly what I did in 1973 when I started. I would operate out of literally the back of my truck. I would find a small project. It could be in Center City. It could be in one of the neighborhoods, Fishtown, University City, Germantown, South Philly, Passyunk, you name it, Camden. I would find a niche, and I would operate cheaply. I do that deep knowledge base that I talked about earlier, which is to give me a competitive advantage, have a high knowledge base, either finance, marketing, construction, and I would tinker around and experiment and find a little niche for myself, and then I would grow it slowly and well, knowing full well there's going to be a correction every 7 to 12 years, averaging 10 years, and I'm going to be set back, but I could go 2 steps forward and 1 step back. That's how I would build my business.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Carl. We really appreciate this.
This is great. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Enjoyed it. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Okay,
Take care.
Bye-bye.